Shabbat Shalom, this is Rabbi Ba'al Shiva. Thank you for tuning in to the 4th episode of Resurrecting Jesus, Pronouncing God's Name. We are going to be starting in ancient India, where the Judeo-Christian religions originate from. The Judeo-Christian religions are not a corruption of the Hindu religion, because the people that created the Hindu pantheon were the people that would later become the Judeo-Christians. Before the invasion from the northern tribes, India had one female goddess, and no art or culture to speak of. The story of Adam and Eve was inspired in part by the Hindu epic the Ramayana. It also finds its explanation in the Om symbol. This little dot here represents Atma, or Adam, or soul. This little mark here represents Spanda, or the first movement, or the Big Bang, or Tzimtzum. It is Adam's rib, or Eve. Atma, Adam, or soul, existed before time, which means that God doesn't move or act in the world. This is why one still sits still when one meditates, making oneself like God. Anything that moves is not God. All movement is a movement away from God, which is a negation of God's self. There is no evidence of God in the world, and yet God must exist, because there is no way to make a rational assertion why men should have inalienable rights without asserting God in some form. How do you say that you can't compel a person to work 7 days a week? How do you prevent people from having to compete with people forcing their slaves to work 7 days a week? You make a holy day, and you give it to God. You can't use science or evolution for supporting that assertion or compelling other people's participation. God was also posited in mathematics to prevent the problem of infinite regress, which is the cause before the cause, before the cause, before the cause, before the cause. Since God doesn't move in the world, he must have some way of exerting an influence on the world. The prime mover, unmoved, works his will on the universe through the Shakti, the Shekhinah, or the Holy Spirit. And below, we see the male and the female seeking each other out in order to put God back together again, in order to create. To be the creator, you have to be male and female. Otherwise, no creation is possible. Even the Dalai Lama says that Samantabhadra is the highest form of Buddha. In previous episodes, we spoke of how one pronounces the ineffable name with one's thoughts, words, intentions, and actions. To have a philosophy was to have a soul, and to be a philosopher. It was to be rational, a rational individual, sound in body and mind. In ancient times, psychology and philosophy were synonymous. The second way to pronounce God's name, besides being rational and a philosopher, is to pronounce God's name by being rational in relationship. This is the science of pronouncing God's name as two. It is the beginning of a philosophical brotherhood or a philoish. In this relationship, two people only relate positively and rationally to one another. They increase each other's value in every way. If you think of the term appreciation, to appreciate means to reciprocate by increasing in value. They educate each other. This relationship is scientific, philosophical, psychological, financial, political, religious, and anything that can be imagined. It is the relationship of everything. The last way to pronounce God's name, and I might be the only one teaching this, if this secret hasn't been lost, it's being kept very well. The first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, the vowels were removed. We're going to come back to the meaning of that later, but the first thing it does is it prevents anybody from holding a singular correct interpretation of the law. But it doesn't allow an excess of deviation from the form of the good or lawlessness. In some ways, it has the same effect as the Sanatana Dharma in India. It allows people to have different interpretations and be granted a form of equity as long as they can prove their interpretation based on the Pentateuch, which is why you have so many commentaries by rabbis, each with their own interpretation. Now, the first two books of the Bible are Genesis and Exodus, or going in and going out. The first thing you do when you are born is you breathe in, or inspire. And the last thing you do when you die is expire. These correspond to the in-breaths and the out-breaths of Brahma. I'm not the only person that thinks this, but some of us believe that Brahma was Abraham. Heinrich Zimmer mentioned that there is only one temple to Brahma in the entire world, and that the majority of demons in Hindu mythology became powerful by worshipping Brahma. It is also worth mentioning that Muslims follow the Abrahamic law code, not the Messianic law code, and not the Mosaic law code. Some of you might know the story of how Solomon bound Ifrit, who was a powerful and violent and immoral jinn. I would wager that Muhammad let that genie out of the bottle. Coming back to the symbolism of the devowelation of the Pentateuch, we realize that the characters in the Pentateuch represent every person in the world. The vowels, which have been removed, represent how every person in the world is in relationship with one another. The root word of religion is lig, as in lignin, ligash, ligature, and ligasi. It means link. Religion is relinking or reconnecting. So the last way to pronounce God's name is for every person in the world to be rational in relationship with one another. A global philosophical family. Thank you for joining us for this tutorial. This is Rabbi Ba'al Shiva. May God bless you this Saturday and Sunday.